Okay. Okay, everything should be up and running and live. I will pull up the chat on my phone just so I can see it working.
Is there any way that we can help with chat? Like, would you like us to read out chat?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Just eyeball that. I mean, I generally try and keep an eye on it as much as I can, but yeah, I have
Yeah.
no problem having better help with that.
We're live, by the way. I just noticed,
Oh yeah.
as in our audio is live. Yeah. Okay.
Great, it's all working. How exciting. I've
Great.
posted the timeline into the Twitch chat
Excellent.
for people to follow along with us.
So, as a note for those that are listening / watching to this now, live, if there are any issues, if you notice any issues in terms of the audio, please let me know in chat as soon as possible, and I will try to get that worked out. Already dealing with a bunch of tech issues, as is tradition on this platform. But nevertheless, we are here. This is Wanderer's Guide to Esterra, episode 16, the Concordian Timeline. This admittedly has been on my list to do for some time. Just waiting for the moment to pull the trigger. A perfect storm pretty much happened a couple of weeks ago. And now I have Brendan Ellis and Mathew Owens here to go on through the whole thing. Thank you for joining me.
Delighted to be here. Long time listener, first time caller.
You fuck.
That's my bit, Brendan. I'm sure you've got a gag ready to go. Can you just deploy it and then we'll get into the timeline?
Yes. Local political gag here.
Great.
Excellent.
How lucky are you, Luke, to be blessed by not one Lorena Mare player but two?
I don't know. It feels a little anarchy in here.
It's just like a little Artibizzani menage a trois on the eve of the revolution.
Sure.
Feels good.
Yeah, it feels great. I totally don't feel like I have that knife to my throat right now. In the nicest way possible.
That's okay, Luke. Carry on.
No, but
There's no
great.
issue here. That's you're doing great.
No,
Great.
in all seriousness, no. I am genuinely happy of starting to very much get in folks from more so across the Concord. I'm genuinely happy to have it.
I like to think of us all as Concord players. Let's not think of us as our various factions or realms or
Yes.
councils.
True.
We're all here. All of us are equal, but some, I suppose, are slightly more equal than others. Anyway, that's
Interesting statement.
I couldn't agree more.
Nevertheless, we have a timeline to crack onto. So, for a note, those listening, we're not going to delve into every single thing on this every single article on this timeline specifically and talk about it. A lot of these we're probably just going to go, a thing happened, whoop, move on. A lot of these mainly we're going to cover, and I'm very much in agreement with this idea, stuff that has happened in the past 40-ish years in terms of like in-game time, because those are the events that player characters will have possibly lived through and or have lived through the very recent like ramifications and consequences of those particular situations, because those are the ones you'll relate to the most. There's of course some historical events that are kind of worth noting on because they're just a bit spicy and a bit interesting. But for the most part, as it were, the word time on the brain, apparently. I'm going to crack in through, talk about more so the recent history, because the recent history is kind of the most scariest in a lot of ways. So, um, let's kick things off. Owens, if you want to start us off on the first few.
Sure. So I think the first few are pretty self-explanatory. So Hjorvarth's Rampart, built over 1400 years ago. Balag's Holdfast, around, what's that, 950. Alfen's Wall, 600-ish. Balag's Outer Walls finished around 500 years ago. So, I mean, these four entries right at the beginning are just really to emphasize how ancient a lot of the Iron Valley infrastructure is, and it's centuries, and in one case, over a millennia of history recorded on these structures. And you know, in game theorized that Hjorvarth's Rampart and Alfen's Wall have been entirely deconstructed by the Ilsevere, and certainly the Balag's Holdfast is being dismantled. And I believe the results of the Conflux choice means that all of the stories in Balag's Holdfast have been lost by the Iron Valley. And then snuck in the middle of their negative 600 BE, so roughly 800 years ago, is the establishment of the Adabazani Empire. So arguably the Adabazani Empire, very, very ancient society. And sorry, just I've posted the timeline in the Twitch chat, but you can also find it on the wiki as well. And we have before establishment, and then which is BE, and AE is after establishment, and that all refers to the formal establishment of the Church of the Divine Spheres. So that is year 0 in the Concord timeline. So that jumps us through the first sort of 5-ish entries there.
If I may just quickly emphasize something regarding the establishment of the Adabazani Empire, obviously that's 600 BA, which is for establishment. So the Adabazani Empire is 600 years older than the religion that it kind of models itself around, which I found interesting and has come up in conversations a number of times.
Yeah, it's actually, that's an incredible point. It's just like, oh yeah, like the Empire's a lot older, which does, there's a bunch of other like interesting stuff. If you read the Adabazani section of the wiki, there's some very interesting stuff that sort of points to past events that might have occurred as a with this being the ultimate result. Yeah, it's a wild thought of like, what the hell was Adabzan even like at that point before the church? Because obviously, like, to an extent, Imber
And
is
honestly,
frozen
in
away.
universe, there's probably no answer to that.
Possibly.
You ask an Aloranamer and they'll probably give you one theory, and you ask a Bordovarian and they'll probably give you a different one. Yeah.
I got no.
Should we crack on with some of these other entries?
Yeah, I got nothing really to say on this other than just a bunch of crazy shit happened within like the span of a few hundred years there. It's kind of cool, but other than that, there's not too much really we can say. So yeah, Braden, do you want to crack us on with the next few?
Yeah, sure. So 300 BE, we have the reign of Maestra Anna Aguinaldo, the high point of the old Andashi Empire. Did you want me to pause there? Do you have some comment to make about that, Luke, or do you want me to keep going?
Not really. Like, not a lot is not a lot is known. I believe this is the last Mistra we had in Old Andash at the time of the Empire, and then it fell. I believe this same person was in power. I'm pretty sure. which means either they were long lived, because I think the empire fell, I think a decent amount after this, or it wasn't too long, and I'm just reading my dates wrong. But yeah, this is interesting in that this is the only
It's
ruler
about
we know about.
75 years later. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, so it is still
Yeah.
an average lifespan, more or less. Okay, so then the only thing is, this is the only ruler in Old Andash that we actually know of. We do not know about any others, as far as I'm aware. So the fact that this is the one means this is either the last one they had, which I believe it is, or this is the best, because we don't know about any
I
others.
mean, this entry specifically points this out as being the high point
Mm.
of the old Andashi Empire.
Yeah, so one of those things of like, be interesting to know about the other ones, but that's for high historian research, amongst other things, to check out.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Following that trend of this being the peak or the end of a thing, you have in 290 BE the last Mountain War. The last would-be king of Balag's holdfast, Balag the Ninth, is killed. The Iron Valley's system of boroughs takes shape. So that political system that the Iron Valley has to this day is about, what, 500 years old?
Mm.
And transitions away from being a kingdom at that point, which is interesting.
Mm.
Following that, you have between 281 and 253 BE, you have the Axemen's War. The Iron Valley invades the Bales in an escalation of conflict. I'm going to butcher these names. Baal Abane becomes Bolsterly as part of the valley. Bales Fiutiore and Fane join as thralls, maintaining their culture and society, but owing fealty to the High Council of Reeves. Baal Lokra remains independent. Following that, you have in 225 BE the defeat of the Andashi Imperial Army at Saramento by the Witch, which we were referring to earlier. And this point is recognized as the official end of the Andashi Empire. This is the first mention and only mention, I believe, of the Witch in the timeline, but recently revisiting this timeline, I was surprised to see that the witch is mentioned here.
Mm-hmm.
And so the legacy of the witch is a huge one. And who knows what the nature of this thing is. But obviously, it's not afraid to meddle in mortal affairs.
Not in the slightest, no.
I think this is a relatively innocuous entry, but it's probably the most significant entry for Andash players.
Yeah.
There's been no Andash basically for 450 years, and this is the end of that. How much we in universe know about it remains to be seen. But this entry definitely paints the witch as an aggressor against Andash, which I think is another very important thing to note. And most importantly, the Andash were defeated. It ended. This was the end, and so Andash trying to reclaim its former glory would arguably be looking to set up something that is over 450 years old again, and just imagine how much of that is lost to time, and discovering all of those things, which, there's a lot of flavor around the temple excavation around that. So this one entry, I think, which is only 2 sentences, I think is the most impactful for Andash players in this timeline.
Yep, definitely agree.
Agreed.
It's such, as you say, it's such a simple 2 sentences, but those simple 2 sentences, when you really do think about the deeper implications, it really just spiderwebs out into a bunch of other stuff. So, yeah, it's cool. It's neat.
Would you like us to continue with these entries, Luke?
Yeah, keep going. I got nothing more to say on that one really. It's just it is simple on the surface. It's more complicated on after that. The next entry has me a little bit curious because I noticed something that could be
Mm.
interesting. So go ahead.
Yeah, so this is at 174 BE. So, again, to be clear, 174 years before the establishment of the official religion of the spheres is the revelation of Niccolo van der Muur and the establishment of the cult of Niccolo. Niccolo, of course, being of Niccolo's window fame, and this cult being the beginning of the worship of the spheres.
The particular thing I find interesting about this, I don't know if there is any connection, is the fact that Niccolo's revelation came roughly 50 years, just over 50 years after the fall of Andash.
Mm,
Like that's not long. Like an entire empire, like in terms of historical records, officially ended roughly 50 years later. Revelation of the spheres as a whole, like that's kind of crazy.
it's probably worth, since you're highlighting the connection between the two events, it's worth noting that these happened on two different continents.
Mm,
So we don't know what connection or communication, if any, the continent Esterra that we're on now had with the continent that the Artisan were on. So, and whether they had any communication with the old Andash Empire at that point, that is unknown. Um, but yeah, 50 years between the defeat of Andash and the establishment of the cult of Niccolo, and then a further 50-ish years, the year 122 BE, is when Niccolo died. And again, 122 years before his cult became their prime religion, which I found interesting. I would have expected him to have had a more
active role.
aggressive involvement
Mm.
in that establishment, but no.
I think there's some interesting threads you can draw from there. So the revelation of Niccolo is and apologies for jumping ahead
No, it's
to the
fine.
0 AE entry, is that 0 AE is founded when Artaban recreates Niccolo's window. So
Mhm.
it is inferred, but not explicit, that this 174 BE entry, the revelation of Niccolo,
Yeah.
is when Niccolo creates his window. Now, how he does that, what mechanisms he uses to do so, remains to be seen. But then the church is not founded until the Artaban are able to recreate his window. So I think there's a good connection there to the control that the Artaban Empire exert over their kingdom and their empire.
Mhm.
And I certainly am interested as to where the original window is, or if it is still in existence, or if that is still if it is a physical thing, or if it's maybe some religions you meditate enough and you experience maybe the window is a practice or
Mhm.
something along those lines. So this revelation appears to be the creation of the window, and we also know through various content that when Niccolo died, many priests viewed his soul visiting all of the spheres when he died. So at his death at 122 BE, there were a lot of priests of the spheres, or the cult of Niccolo, who watched through the window Niccolo's soul visiting all of the spheres. So spheres. And so a lot of people would have known about that original window. but Artisan had to recreate it, which I think is a very tasty content piece about the OG window.
Mhm.
I think that's a little bit of flavor tucked away in here.
There's another interesting little thing that I find. Again, this could be nothing, but like every single one of these entries, most of them anyway, have like a little subtitle of like what they are. It's like military action, religious, that sort of thing. The fact that the revelation of Niccolo is labeled celestial, but the arrival of the cult of Niccolo in Esterra and Drummond is called a religious event. I find it interesting that those two are separated by that particular distinction.
Mm.
Because if you think,
I wouldn't read too. Yeah, I'm
I
not going
know.
to read too much into that. I think that's just I think that's just a World Anvil tagging system.
Sure.
There, yeah.
Something that you pointed out that raises an interesting question for me, Owens, is it's not like it is implied and has always been implied that Niccolo was a member of the ancient Artabazani Empire, but that isn't explicitly stated here. And so the fact that, as you pointed out, the the after establishment starts with Artabazani recreating this window implies that they could, and this is obviously speculation, but there could be room for there to have been some level of appropriation of this religious cult of Nicolo's, and so it would be interesting if that knowledge existed of where Niccolo stood, and where his cult stood within the empire of the Artabazan. They obviously had
And
enough power. 74 years after the establishment of the cult, they 100 BE, they arrive in Esterra and Drummond. So they obviously have enough power to be able to mobilize and to come to a different continent, and which notably is 20 years before Posta Lorona becomes Lorena Mayor. So yeah, I'm interested in where Niccolo fits in with the Artabazani Empire.
And let's speculate even further. Let's go into another layer of speculation that perhaps Niccolo, viewing the spheres, realized that the Artabazan Empire was not in alignment with the spheres, and as such did not want his window to be utilized by that empire to continue its regime, and thus instructed his followers to dismantle the window and hide pieces of it all across the globe to avoid the Artabazan Empire from gaining that power.
Quite possible.
Hashtag Niccolo was the first revolutionary of the Concord. Thank you.
Quite possible. I mean,
It's confirmed here.
it's an interesting
No, it's just
thing
a dumb
that
bit. You go.
I hear mutterings and whispers and rumors of there being like somewhat church related sort of divine relics in is it Mercante Terra? I believe it's Mercante Terra if I remember correctly. So maybe could be that. I mean that would make sense. That would, given the vibe I've gotten off of Niccolo in everything I've learnt in game thus far, I don't get the sense he'd like the Artabazan Empire very much, especially with how much they've twisted the faith.
Maybe one day someone will be able to meet him in character, but who knows?
Who knows?
I do like your headcanon though, Owens, of Niccolo coming to Esterra and then spreading the 7 Dragon Balls out across the continent for someone to gather and resummon the ancient dragon Niccolo.
Yeah, I was thinking of pieces of the Triforce in the classic Legends of Zelda: The Wind Waker. But anyway, let's move along.
Yeah. So yeah, 80 BE, You have the establishment of Posta Lorona, the township that would become Lorona Mare by Artabazani settlers. It doesn't say, I believe, when that change of name happens, but yeah, it is notable that Artabazan, at the very least, make a settlement long after the cult of Niccolo arrives on the continent, which is interesting. Following that, 50 years later, at 30 BE, you have the Greenweald baronies that are founded. A union of Esterrans and Drummonites, which is interesting as well, enter the Greenweald, and the cult of Niccolo is common among their number. I, for one, was surprised. I would have expected the baronies to be a bit older than that. So I found that to be interesting that they're only, 300 ish, almost 300 years old.
Roughly, yeah. A few hundred years old. It feels like it would be a lot older given like the weird nature of it. You'd think the Greenfield as a nation, as a realm, would be a lot older. And like I guess the Greenfield as a thing has probably been there for ages. I think that's not a harsh thing to say, but like the culture, as it were, not that old, which is kind of
Mm,
wild.
yeah. And then, unless anyone else has any more comments about that, that brings us to AE, to after establishment, 0 AE, where the church begins a new chronology. The cult of Niccolo becomes the Church of the Divine Spheres in Ardbazan, with the recreation of Niccolo's Great Window.
Interesting that it's recreation,
Mm-hmm.
not like recover or reactivation, recreation, indicating, yeah, that it was maybe destroyed or dismantled and they just either built the same one again through the pieces or they just built a new one entirely, which is kind of nuts.
I mean, it certainly implies that these windows can be created. I mean, just built. Who knows the process in which to do that? Maybe people do know that process. But it's certainly an interesting entry with a lot of implications.
Mm.
I got nothing
Quite
more
quite
to say on this one.
rapidly, yeah.
Yeah.
Quite rapidly after that are a few interesting ones, but an interesting one is the Artabazan settling Mercante Terra and Barbariano across a 86-year time frame. So that's where they built up Posta Lorona and Vidania, and then the throne of Artabazan. Again, an interesting implication that the throne is an Artabazani creation that has carried over into the founding constitution of the Concord. But the throne marks Posta Lorona as the capital of the Artabazani colonies, and Vidania loses out, as there was a bit of a competition between the two. So again, implied from that is that there is a city in Barbariano roughly the same size as Lorona Mare, sitting there, just having been sacked by the Il Sevilla, and so we'll get into that in later entries. And the colonies are renamed New Cordicia, but are largely referred to as Lorona Mare. So I'm not sure where New Cordicia comes from. Potentially a state or a fiefdom or something in Artabazan, similar to Wales and then New South Wales, as we see in real life. 35 AE, so while Artabazan is settling those areas, Artorius Bordavar lands at True Landing. And then not long after, what is that? 36 years later, dies of a fever with no heir apparent. Which in turn functionally founds the current storyline and content and a lot of motivation of Kingdom of Bordevar characters as to who is now the king of Bordevar.
I mean, arguably, it started an era which Bordevar as a nation is still in, right? Like
Absolutely.
almost
A kingless
150
kingdom.
years later. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's pretty
After
much
that
yeah.
skill issue, you have 90 AE to 92 AE, the First Mercenary War, which is a history that I had kind of forgotten that Lorena Mare shares with the Valley. So Lorena Mare secures Bolsterley from the Iron Valley. The war ends with the third failed siege of Dioling Citadel. Imperial Minister of War Gustavo Villa recognizes the sovereignty of the Iron Valley within the Iron Valley. Bael Fane and Bael Fiatore break their thrallhood, reviving their twin royal lines. So that seems to be the first noted instance of a failure in Artabazani's colonization of the continent.
And this is another, and the second mercenary war entry right after it as well. Again, two innocuous entries with a huge amount of ramifications in terms of the in-universe history. Artabazan wanted to conquer the Iron Valley, and so when the people of Lorona Mare revolted against Artabazan, it was the Iron Valley has a shared enemy with the people of Lorona Mare, which is Artabazan. And so those of Bolsterley and those of the Valley and Windhome arguably cheered just as much for the revolution as the people of Lorona Mare themselves. This explains why Dioling Citadel is pointed out towards Lorona Mare, because that's where the sieges were coming from about 100-ish, little over years ago. And I think this also explains the unbreakable nature of the Valley in Windhome, how well defended they are. And this is sort of the setup to the shock that is when the Onyx and the Ilsevere come, and the long defeat. I think this is sort of a primer to that. And then also in these two is the re-establishment of the Balites, who then again and going to the next entry in 151 AE suddenly disappear. So these three in a row tell a very interesting history over about a 60-year period of a lot of goings on in that southeastern section of Esterra, with again a lot of implications that would carry over. So this is around, this is maybe your parents or grandparents were involved in this potentially.
I was going to say, this is, for context, 3 to 4 generations back. So grandparents, great-grandparents.
Yeah, probably, and arguably some characters may have heard stories from their grandparents about these goings on.
This is the part in the timeline where there are a lot of events fairly shortly together. So you have 3 years after the Balites disappearing, the first battle between the Greenweald Baronies and the Zekatal war tribes, which is what they refer to here in northwest Ritterswold, which is the first mention of the Zekatal, and so presumably one of the first appearances of the Zekatal is 154 AA. And what, 180-ish years after the baronies have established themselves. So which implies that the Zekatal are not as ancient as they or their law might imply.
They are certainly, Artabazan aside, they're probably the oldest enemy of the Concord. This is the
Mm,
earliest entry of an attack on what will be eventually be a Concord member realm. So sort of 70-ish years ago was the first attack on the Greenworld by an external force,
Mm-hmm.
and arguably the first external attack on what it will become the Concord. So although the Zerkatal, and why they decided to attack then, were they biding their time for that 180 years to launch their attack on these baronies who are cutting down their trees and setting up civilization in their forests? But it's sort of the oldest note that we have
Mm-hmm.
in terms of an existing current force that has attacked a Concord realm.
mm,
And that continues through to the Shaman's War as well. So a 6-year war where the Greenworld lose Ritterswold to the Zerk, or the Zek, and but they get one back where the first shaman is slain by Ulrich Vocker, the son of a Baron Ritter Vocker. Arguably where the term Ritter comes from.
mm.
I
Do
find
we have context for? Sorry, Luke. Do we have context for what the first shaman of the woods is? Like, I assume that would be their leader, but I don't know if there's any confirmation of
Mhm.
that.
That's exactly what I was actually gonna point out. Is like we don't really know what first shaman means. We can infer, with the amount we know about the Zerkatal now, but I don't know if that's necessarily going to be useful. Um, I think this is just a case that this is just a major leader. I think that's it. We just don't know.
I would be surprised if something regarding shamans and Zerkatal hadn't been seeded into the player base. And I
Mhm.
have a strange memory that Thorn and Shaman as a title are linked somehow. I can't don't
It,
publish me on that one.
it'd fit for what we
Uh,
know about them. Same thing with Ash or even Oak. Like it could fit with any of them. Thorn, I would say more so, possibly.
And then 25 years after the first attack from the Zerkatal on the baronies, we have the first sign of the Onyx aristocracy popping up, sacking Port Gargant in the Steel Archipelago. And then they raise the flag
Mm-hmm.
over that area, the first time it is seen in southern Esterra.
Indeed, and this is likely
And it's
where
worth.
that Onyx aristocracy major figure gained the moniker of the Wraith of Port Gargant.
Mm,
Uh,
yeah, that's interesting.
yeah, so this is
It's.
probably where
I
that
think it's
came from.
also notable that this is what 44 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so this is within the lifetime of several player characters, and absolutely, the parents and guardians of most existing player characters that weren't born at that stage.
Mm-hmm.
So this is in recent memory.
Indeed, this is roughly 20-ish years before the beginning of the war with the Onyx against the Kingdom of Bordevar. It's not that long
Mm.
in terms of like living memory, as it were.
Yeah.
And
So
then 10
10.
10 years later,
Mm,
we
you
have.
go.
I got you. We have another enemy of the Concord pop up. So there's a bit of a, this is the run of the enemies of the Concord appearing, and this is in real world terms, 1990. So
Yeah.
190 AE, the twin blades reappear. So which we now know are made up of a whole range of different peoples, and they claim Apravano. And we know now in the current Concord timeline how that has all played out. But this enemy has reappeared about it is 34 years ago, and so this again, and we're getting closer and closer to the current time, and more of these events should be at least in the minds of more and more players as we trek through the timeline. But across a 40-year period, 3 of our major enemies sort of appear.
An interesting thing I want to note, just as just a funny aside, about the particular thing with the reappearance of the Twin Blade Confederacy. The fact that the first line of the part of this is, despite existing in theory for hundreds of years. That's kind of a big question mark, because it's sort of, I mean, obviously we know the Baylight Kings were a part of, or King of the Bales. I can't quite remember what the particular subfaction is for the Twin Blade Confederacy, but that was definitely something to do with the Bales. There's don't sleep on that line. Don't sleep on the despite existing for in theory for hundreds of years. Don't sleep on that. I think that's a bit more than what it seems personally. That would be my guess, because that's kind of crazy. And it's like, oh yeah, just a pirate coalition has just existed for ages, in theory, whereas now it's actually a thing, apparently. That's weird. That's a little weird to me. That's all I got to say on that. It's a little weird that that line is there.
Yeah, it's
It,
definitely jumped out to me when I read that as well.
Um, yeah, I got nothing more to say on that one, because the next particular line, speaking of enemies taking action against us, a big one happens.
so this is a 6-year war by the Zekatal against the Baronies again, and they crushed the Lurenhertz. That again, an innocuous line that it draws troops across the Baronies, Iron Valley, Andash, and beyond. So this entry is the first indication that that the Concord, an alliance is being formed
An alliance, yeah.
amongst all of these realms. So, um, and interestingly, during this war, when Andash is fighting against the Zekatal, the next entry, 199, Obregon is reclaimed from the sands, so it's uncovered, probably similar to the current temple excavation that's taking place at the moment. And the Andash people announce, a reborn empire. Andash is back. In no small part, I imagine, due to this war of Molten Moon, bringing people together for that emergency that took place.
Mm-hmm.
Just
And
before we move on to this really notable event at the end of the War of the Molten Moon, I will point out that the beginning of this entry states that the Zekatal are led by new leaders, which I assume is reference to the emergence of Thorn, Ashen Oak, or at the very least Ashen Oak. So their emergence in the timeline is pretty recent as well.
Mm-hmm. Good point out. Absolutely relevant.
And then that War of the Molten Moon ends with the year without moon in 204 AE. And I will read this exactly as it is written here because the wording of this is very interesting. Zekatal sorcery appears to destroy a new moon, which rains down on the castle of Baronite Bolhertz. There was no new moon over the Greenweald for a year. Which I
So
would
we've
note
seen.
in terms of, I would note that, and for those who haven't seen it in the Concord Discord, Owen's very helpfully related the events of the last 30-ish years to real world events, and both in terms of relative timeline and scale, this sticks out to me. I don't know if you made the comparison, but this sticks out to me as the equivalent roughly of the Trade Center towers,
Mhm.
you know, 9/11.
Yeah, for sure. This we've seen in recent history the Zakatal wield immense heathen magic, and this is an example of that exact thing. This will be in most players' memories.
Mhm.
There certainly is a population that is a bit too young for this to be in their memories, but they certainly will. A lot of players will have existed in this time frame, and maybe even some, depending on their backgrounds, may have been involved in the Molten Moon War and exist and lived in the Green World during the year without moon. So for a whole year, the sun would set, and then nothing. There would be no. It would just be the stars in the sky. There would be no moon.
So the
And
wording
so
of this is no new moon, which I interpreted as the specific phase of the moon just not appearing, but the other phases are. But
that's interesting.
um,
So like a full moon, there
because
was no full, like a new moon, a full bright moon. That's a good
yeah, I
pickup.
mean, yeah, it specifically says a couple of times, appears to destroy a new moon, and
Yep,
then
good
states
call.
there was no new moon. So whether that, I guess there's a bit of interpretation of what that means, whether it does mean the moon at all. But that would be my interpretation of that specific phase of the moon. Doesn't appear.
So it would just for maybe how long does a new moon last? Like 2 days or something, and maybe just for that period of time. And
Just
then you'd
complete
start
dark.
getting to your crescent moon or whatever. Yeah,
Yeah.
interesting.
There's also the word there. The sorcery appears to destroy new moon. So you could. There's a lot that could be inferred from that of how literal that destruction is, whether it's just this crazy illusion magic, and if that's the case, what is the point of that? What does that achieve? Which has several different answers, but
Mhm.
yeah, that wording there seems pretty deliberate
I
to
agree.
me.
It's definitely on my list for, and I'm shameless plug. Want to get a higher historian again. That is on my list of stuff I want to look into because that's that whole the blunt statement of appeared to destroy a new moon and just threw it at a guy is kind of insane. It's like, oh yeah, and then no new moon for a year. Like, what? It's such a
Pretty wild
massive.
for sure.
It's just,
Yeah.
it's like for how? So yeah, it's on my list of stuff I want to look into because that's such a big question mark because that's either, as you say, it's just an illusion and it's not real at all, and it was just one big set of trickery, or something a lot more apocalyptic went down.
The image that I have in my head around this is like in a Final Fantasy game of a
Mm-hmm.
big ultimate move of one of the player characters chapters or like the final boss, where you have like the 2 minute long cinematic, which is just a move of like bringing an asteroid down on the
Yep.
Earth.
Yeah, meteor.
That's what I imagine.
Yep.
Yeah, when I look at this.
Same. It's exactly where my head was at as well.
But thankfully, the moon it was only gone for a year, and
It
then
got better.
it got better. So, whew, thank goodness for that. The next three entries, again, speculation warning, are maybe a little bit more connected. Two of them are directly connected, but the middle one there is maybe a little bit more connected than appears on first reading. So 205 AE, the first war, or the beginning of the war against the Onyx aristocracy, where the vampire knights of the Marble Gauntlet crush the fourth banner in True Landing. So a full banner of the kingdom is defeated by the vampire knights. That banner then rises and goes and attacks the city of Vetasport, which I think is just a great, a great story beat as to how the Onyx is working and why the kingdom should, in quotation marks, be so invested in defeating the Onyx and the Concord succeeding, because they are literally fighting against their own risen people. So the defensive line falls back to Royal Bordevar. 206 AE, the first appearance of Blassistrite is reported in eastern Vassatal, which is very, very close to where all these goings on with the Onyx are. And for the conspiracy theorists out there who are speculating on the origin of the Blassistrite, many believe that it was a creation of the Zekatal. There is another camp that is of the view that it was created as a bioweapon by the Onyx aristocracy. I don't think we have confirmation on that, and if we do, keep it to yourselves. That is an in-game thing to discuss.
The other side,
but there's a lot of speculation around that.
Yeah, the third conspiracy is that the Blaster Strike was something that a Green Wielder made, realized it was bad, locked it up,
there you go.
and then at some point, maybe through some of the events that happened, it got out and went absolutely batshit insane.
Cool. There you go. There's another one. So that will be, I hope, or imagine, or perhaps potentially not confirmed at some point. And then 207, the fourth banner then attacks Andersley. So the region in the Iron Valley. And the siege of the valley begins as the Risen claw at the walls of Hjorvarth's Rampart and Alfwin's Wall. So three, in my view, potentially connected. Two definitely. One potentially. Entries in quick succession there.
It's notable that all of these entries now that we're in are in very quick succession, either happening simultaneously to each other or within a matter of years apart. So there's a clear ramping up and escalation of events, and not just fighting happened, but of notable, impactful events in the war and of various realms.
If you don't mind, the next one, the sinking of the Emperor's Pleasure fleet, is kind of nuts, because this is where we first see a named leader of what was the Twin Blade Confederacy, being the Filia Diabolus.
So this is my favorite timeline entry. This is definitely a Franz Ferdinand entry of Ophelia dunking on the Arbazan Empire. They lose an enormous, like a whole fleet is lost. I imagine there is a lot at the bottom of the off the coast of the Guardian a lot of treasure, which is probably occupying a lot of raiders and divers' time to haul up. And most importantly, an emperor also is lost. Then, in combination with that, the new emperor blames the free captains of Lorona Mare for his successor's death. So more tariffs are levied onto the settlements of Lorona Mare, and things get worse. So things have already been unideal since the since if we scroll back with the capturing of Bolsterley, the or have I skipped ahead to myself?
No. It was back there. You're right. Yeah, there's been unrest amongst the class separation being exacerbated for a long time.
Yeah, for sure. And so this one incident then spirals into arguably kicks off the chain of events that leads to the revolution in Lorona Mare.
Yeah, I would agree with that. The revolution is 11 years after this event. We'll get into that when it comes, but yeah, this seems like within many of our characters' lifetimes, one of their very much precipitating events and the enabling event, I would say, of the beginning of the Seeds of Revolution.
Mm-hmm.
The next one, 213 AE, is the collapse of the line at Royal Bordevoir. So they held on for a decent chunk of time. So the defensive line was drawn in 205. So what's that? 8 years they held, but then that completely collapses, and the capital is under siege. And then, apologies for jumping ahead a little bit, but then again they hold on under siege for a very long time. 2 years later, at 215, the castle falls. So I believe it's called Castle Artorius. And yeah, Royal Bordevoir has fallen to the Onyx, and the flag is raised over that castle. And then 214, a plague hits Vassatale. So 100 days of snowfall in Vassatale as Blasterstrike sweeps the nation. In 3 months, half the region perishes. In another one, the remaining half does. So that is an enormous population wipeout of Vassatale. It is just it is more than, like, it's amazing that there's anything has come back from that with how much of a population loss occurs. And then we move on to 215 AE. And this line, I think, is what has created the speculation that there is a sanctified square in the castle in Royal Bordevoir. A final ceremony allows the Wise Council to escape. So that, and I believe a variety of other seeded things has sort of led to there being some speculation that there is a second sanctified square in Royal Bordevoir or at the castle somewhere. But it's also important to note that ceremonies can also be cast outside of a sanctified square. But it is, the sanctified square is like a focal point that enables ceremonies to be cast much, much more easily. Ceremonies still can be done outside of the sanctified square, but the resources, the power, the mastery, the everything you need is sort of exponentially harder. But it still can be done.
I will also point out that the word ceremony, may not necessarily refer to the in-game mechanic that we know as ceremonies as well.
For sure. Yeah, that's definitely an important thing to note as well. And now we kick into gear with just a lot of war entries. So this is where the realms of the Concord are starting to collapse. It really accelerates from here. There are multiple entries each year. And all of these should, in terms of our adult player base should be in recent memory. So we're only talking 10 years ago to now that all of these entries are starting to happen. So cultists of the Burning Wind attempted to destroy Civicello in the Tribe Lands, who are supported by Zekatal tree beasts. They are repelled, but it will be years before the gardens can again be worked. So the Tribe Lands have some delightful gardens somewhere. Who knows where? But keen to get those working again. And then the Zerkatol attack Eisen. So the Zerka addition it out to both Andash and the Baronies.
Mm.
The first
Almost
mention of Sister.
simultaneously.
Yeah. Only 3 months apart. So Sister Oak steps in to attack Eisen. And then, cause more untold damage. But they are repulsed. And an interesting note here is that it's the diseased Zerkatal are repulsed. So question mark next to that one for sure. And Eisen is reinforced to survive more sieges.
And
Year
then you've got
216. Go
the
ahead, Brendan.
following year. Again, the Zekatal are mentioned here. So this is the third subsequent attack from the Zekatal. A Zekatal force summons a colossal scorpion to attack the meeting of the tribes in Aguinaldo. Thousands perish. So that again brings to mind the equivalent of a very recent terrorist level attack. Thousands dead at what I imagine, my knowledge of the tribal lands and Andash is limited, but that seems like that would be a really significant meeting at at a very vulnerable point in Andash's lifetime.
My guess would be this particular event would have been, at least the meeting would have been like possibly a discussion to work out like what is our culture going forward? What are we going to do? I'm not sure
Mhm.
if that's the case. But that would be my guess. And yeah, and then having a colossal scorpion on top of Zerxal just start massacring. It's worth noting as well. This is for me, especially like playing an Andashi character. This is a particular reason why my current Andashi character, uh, anytime he hears an Andashi being referred to as a scorpion, he gets very, very angry because
Mm.
no, that's incredibly insensitive because of that, and also pointing out like that's, ugh, it's yeah, don't do that. Like I'm like you wouldn't call an Andashi a liar or a thief or a cheat or a snake or whatever. Sure, go ahead. Don't hold off on the scorpion talk, yeah? For
Mhm.
some people probably had relatives there. Some PCs might have been there and survived. Like it's very possible.
Just for imagery of that event as well. I mean, this is pure speculation on my part, but that term colossal, I think back to D&D sizing terms when it comes to
Oh,
monsters,
this is the kaiju.
and
Yeah.
yeah, like this is a potentially a city-sized scorpion, not like a slightly larger scorpion,
Mm.
not a person-sized scorpion. This is at the very least building-sized, if not several times larger than
Yeah,
that.
this thing would have to be, I would
Um,
guess, several city blocks big. Like we're talking mind-breakingly large.
yeah, and so for whoever was, I mean, it doesn't say if there were any survivors or not, but thousands perish, so possibly not. But anyone who may have been there or who would have lost people there, I I could imagine very easily having fears and nightmares of scorpions.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's a very real and relatable thing. And I have not heard that event referred to outside of this timeline as well. So I think, yeah, that's really interesting and important for people to internalize.
Mm-hmm. Um, Following this later in that, I believe in that same year, or is it next year? Oh, yeah,
Yep,
same year.
it is the same year.
Yeah,
It
we
is
got the
6 months later.
Battle of Tristan's Field. Oh boy! So we have the second and third banners also falling against the Onyx Aristocracy Horde. So now they have collected 3 of the 4 Bordovarian banners. Yuck.
And that force is specifically described as the Marble Gauntlet.
And it reappears for the second time, I believe. The name in the historical timeline, that is. The name of the
Hmm.
Marble Gauntlet, which is brutal.
So this is the final defeat in the realm of Royal Bordevar,
Mm-hmm.
and then the kingdom of Bordevar gives up on it and fully retreats to Wayland and prepares the defenses in the township of Wayland. And it's important to remember that Wayland was just a little dinky town, you know, between.
And I assume Royal Bordevar was their capital, right?
Correct. Yep. So the
Yeah.
kingdom has completely lost its capital. It's
I mean,
basically
really,
all of it.
that's equivalent to us losing to Australia, losing Canberra and being forced into WA, right? Or
Yeah, and I don't want a
possibly
bunch
even
of
like
eastern
Tasmania.
staters. Yeah, for sure, and build the wall, but it is an enormous loss um,
Yeah.
of an entire region of these invading forces, and again, it is their own people risen from the dead that are defeating them,
Mm-hmm.
and so a lot of motivation for Kingdom of Bordevar players to be really, and as we get to other events that take place, you'll see so much motivation for everyone to want the Concord to succeed due to this very quick succession of events that has happened.
Indeed.
And wrapping it up in 216 AE is the first appearance of the Ilsevere. So ships start going missing off the southern coast of Baelokra. So while they're not named there, that is where the Ilsevere ships spend a lot of their time. And we've
I
seen the
think it's
barges.
worth. So you go.
We've seen the barges of the Ilsevere. We've seen the war galleys, and then the troop carriers. And so this is the first indication of them arriving in Esterra.
I think it's worth noting that this first attack is described as ships going missing. I because it really portrays this as an unknown and unseen force, um, which in some ways I think is more terrifying than, oh hey, some dudes with crab appendages and crab names have attacked us. It's more like, no, we've our people have just gone missing now
Yeah, this is like the dead
before
men tell no
their
tales
obvious
situation.
arrival.
Like,
Hmm.
no survivors to speak of it. That's why it's unknown, which is awesomely spooky.
And I imagine, Owens, that probably would have been affecting 3 captains more than most other people.
Yeah, for sure, especially those with trade routes in that direction. Suddenly they don't return, or it's months and months without hearing from them. More questions than answers, sort of thing. And so again, another loss. That and the Concord is, well, the realms that were to become the Concord are just racking up more and more defeats across the board.
Mm. Common pre-Concord elves.
Yep. And then I
Yep.
think the next entry in 217 is the Zerkatal, getting a huge claim over Resinderholtz. coming within a day's march of Wolstad. And interestingly, again, we had that first initial reference to many soldiers from different realms fighting in the Green World before, and then here we have that confirmed again, that these forces are repelled by a Green World army led by an Andashi Janissary named Balok del Arcadian. So that is a fascinating piece of content there, which then leads to the next entry, which is the first treaty signed between and the first indication of the Concord appearing, which is the Treaty of Last Pine, which is Andash and Greenweld signing a defensive alliance. If your nation is attacked, we will come to defend, and if your and vice versa. And so this has played out in game as well, with both the Andash army going to the baronies to defend, and the baronies army going to the tribe lands, and the I don't think they've been to Mukarem, but they certainly have visited each other's realms during the wars during the Concord timeline, for sure.
Yeah, I've definitely taken it upon
And as we
myself.
mentioned,
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, as we mentioned earlier in the timeline, this is not the first time that this alliance has occurred, but it can be inferred that this is the first formal alliance that has been, formalized, I suppose.
I've definitely taken it upon myself in game over the past year or so to start making more of a point to honor this particular treaty and being, yeah, I'm not a war leader, I'm not really in the military game, but I'm still making an effort to honor this treaty and very much have been lending a lot more support to Greenfield in their times of need to specifically honor that treaty, because it's not a small thing at all. Like, this is one of the most significant events in Concordian history specifically, because this is what kind of starts it all for the most part. So it's cool. It's a nice piece of history. I
And
like it.
It is, and it's put into effect pretty much immediately, because then the first siege of Eisen begins 4 months later. And to wrap up 2017, 217, the first named entry of the Ilsevere, which are attacking Ardabazani settlements, so in Baal Lokra, and then within a month, the region is lost. So remember back to the sieges of Royal Bordevoir and all of those other wars that have happened, they took years to happen, whereas in this, the timeline has shortened to a month. So a fleet of ships arrives, attacks the settlements, and then within a month, the region is completely gone. So again, an indication onto the speed in which all of these realms are rapidly collapsing, which continues on in 218 as well. So 100 Laronamere ships are sunk in the, I imagine in the bay, but maybe out into the ice reach, due to a combination of the Ilsevere and some storms.
It is referred to as the ice reach sinking, so
yeah,
it
that's
sounds
why
like
I'm
it happened
thinking.
out the bay.
Another second fleet arrives at Barbariano, and Verdania is besieged, and then 2 months later, Verdania falls and Barbariano is lost. So again, thinking back to those other entries, the war against the Zerk, the war against the Onyx, those took years and years for the lines to break and fall, whereas this is now months that the Ilsevere are carving through these settlements. For example, this 218 entry here, which is where the first siege of Eisen ends, that's what's that? That's almost a year from the 8th to the 8th. Yep.
The 8th of 217 is when it starts, and the 3rd of 218 is when it ends, and ends in a retreat of the Zekatal.
Yep. So defeated, the Zerka defeated there. Um, 218. Interestingly, the Artabazan send an entire legion to Lorona Mare. I imagine based on the feedback, the calls for help from their settlers, that they're losing all of these regions very, very quickly.
Mm.
And I don't think
Notably,
they
that
last
is
very long.
4 months. That's 4 months after the fall of Barbariano.
Yep. And then this one, these next two in combination are extremely interesting. So 218, the dead leave the walls of Alphen's Wall and Hjorvarth's Rampart. And then a month later, the Ilsevere begin besieging Hjorvarth's Rampart. And then another month later, the Ilsevere begin besieging Alphen's Wall. So 3 highly connected, very interesting entries there. So the defenders on the wall, so those who were involved in the long defeat, would have seen suddenly one day all of the zombies just pack up and go. And I imagine there would have been much celebration during that.
Yeah.
Right? And then a month later, this horde of people that look like them. I mean, the Elsevier are sacking the Bales and they're sacking settlements of the valley. So people that look like them, silent, suddenly just arrive and start sieging the same places.
Yeah.
Which would be a very interesting story to regale in character.
Just in terms of the image, Ons, you probably know the most about this. The undead that would have been sieging the walls, those would have been primarily Bordovarian undead. Would that be right?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, it would have been the
Yeah.
ones. Yeah.
So yeah, and then for those undead to be traded with, as you say, people who are not undead but effectively undead of their own citizens would be, yeah, a bit of a shock. It's different fighting effectively faceless zombies and undead that you don't have any connection to, but yeah, facing people that you recognize. And to this day there's still a lot of questions about what becoming an Elsevier actually entails and whether you are actually dead upon infection and all this other stuff. Is Yeah, there's lots of existential horrors involved there.
So the valley has much investment in seeing both the Onyx and the Ilsevier defeated, for sure. And then casually at the end of 218, the Zekatel start sieging Eisen again. How nice of them. Thank you very much. And moving
just
into...
go home, guys. Just go home.
Yeah, pack it up, please. Moving into 219, this is where we start to see a lot of the diplomatic entries and a lot of the political entries where the next run of entries are focused around the forming of the Concord itself. So Iron Valley, Andash, and Greenweld all get together to chat in Wolstad early on. In April of 219, the 62nd Legion is destroyed by the Shark. So hang on, how long did they last? The 8th, so 8 months the Legion lasted against the Ilsevier. And the Shark is still around, so the Shark's force is still sitting there, giggling away at itself, attacking Lorena Mare every now and then. Bordovard draws a new defensive line along the Lancaster Hills, and I believe there's now a sheriff in charge of that area, which is I imagine would be a source of pride for that character to say this is where, we formed our new defensive line here. Okay, all right. And then this entry, 219 June. A dragon descends from the Steinvolt Mountains and attacks Alphen's Wall. the Ilsevere swarm, Alphen's wall falls. Now there's a billion speculation we can do with this entry. Is the dragon an enemy? Is it just a mindless creature? Is it in league with the Ilsevere? Was it
Does
a
it
happy
have a tadpole
coincidence?
in it?
Is it an Ilsevere dragon? Where did it go? Why have we not seen the dragon again?
This is
Did
also
the
notably
dragon?
the only entry talking about dragons in this timeline as well, right?
And I would imagine dragons are a relatively, like you'd say if you saw a dragon, right?
I believe this
think
is the
it's not
only
something
entry
Yeah.
mentioning dragons.
it's not something you'd keep to yourself,
Yeah.
necessarily. So, yeah, look, I could spend half an hour talking about that one, but it is what it is. Maybe you saw the dragon. Maybe your character was on the wall and saw the dragon. I don't know.
Nevertheless, though, not too long
Make up some
after.
content and plot around that. Maybe
Yeah.
you are the dragon. Maybe you're the dragon's child. All of these would definitely be canon. Just use your imagination and make it up. I'm being facetious. Please don't do that.
But yeah,
Then quickly after
we have the fall of
Alphen's wall
Rampart.
falls. Yep. Luke's got the Who of Us Rampart falls, is abandoned. So that's the long defeat. The siege of Eisen ends in August 2019. So not too long ago, 5 years ago. 300 captives are taken by the Zek as they retreat. So who knows what happens to those 300 captives. 2019, September 2019, Brothersley is abandoned, and so civilians retreat to Windhome from Brothersley. And then a month later, Balfatori or Feel or whatever is lost to Ilsevere again, and these are things happening month after month, so the pace is very, very quickly happening very quickly. And then December 2019, the leadership of Lorona Mare, who at this time would still be Artabazani, joins the discussions at Wolstad.
Yeah.
So interesting that, I mentioned before that the Valley would have an ancient reason to not like the Artabazan. So I'm curious how those discussions went.
Yeah, I mean, I would like to point out, the words Lorona Mare are there, but really that is Artabazan. Artabazan was discussing joining the Concord, and who are the individuals who were part of these diplomatic meetings? Were any of them player characters? I don't know, but there were members of those three realms who met and discussed and were very serious about joining an alliance with Artabazan, with Artabazani people. So, it's skipping ahead a little bit, but we all know what ended up happening to the Artabazan in control of Lorena Mare. So I imagine whoever would have been involved in those treaties and discussions would have some feelings about the fact that, Artabazan have withdrawn from these conversations. Oh, hey, who are these new guys? Oh, don't worry, we just killed the Artabazan. We're here now. I don't know what those feelings would be, and those feelings would be different for everyone involved, but I think that is worth pointing out and emphasizing that exactly how new the current leadership, for lack of a better word, of Lorena May is, and that there would have been several living people from other realms who were dealing with the Artisan.
The next sort of set of entries, the 220 and beyond, are events that are still occurring. Some of them are still occurring in the game, and the events that are occurring as we interact with the world, beginning with the first one, which is the siege of Belag holds fast. So eventually Belags would fall to the Ilsevere, and that is something that is still being dealt with by us in the game. The tribes and sailors of Mukarem decide to join Andash. So I think this is an interesting entry that the voluntarily Mukarem joins the Andashi Empire and signs up and sort of
And
cedes their
very
sovereignty.
recently.
Very recently, yeah. Which I think there's a lot of depth there to tell some great stories about what that looks like. I think that's definitely a triumph amongst all of the disaster that is happening. I think that's a good example of quite a good news story amongst it all. Then in March, so a month later, and again, these events are happening very, very rapidly. Those diplomatic discussions that were mentioned a few entries ago now go into an alliance, and the Concord itself is first theorized, and the Concord would eventually become more than an alliance. It would become a nation in and of itself, but that was first discussed there. And then Bordavar arrives at the discussions, and you can sort of argue Bordavar was the last to the table, or potentially you could argue that Lorona Mare was last to the table, because the next entry is the revolution. So in November 220, or in real years, 2020 November, is the Lorona Mare revolution. So 4-ish years ago, the Artisan are overthrown by the free captains and the people of Lorona Mare, who then, a few months later, rejoin the discussions of the Concord.
And just to put in terms of game, that is just over 6 to 7 months prior to the first Concord event in 2021. In 221, that nation of New Lorona Mare is less than a year old.
So the leaders who signed the Concord were barely there, had literally just walked in the door. We've also often discussed that potentially they didn't even read the whole thing before signing up. And so
that would definitely be within brief.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. And then potentially, you could argue that a lot of people didn't read the Concord Constitution or any of those things before it was signed, because of the rapid losses that happened. Something needed to be done, and so the normal diplomatic processes where things are negotiated and argued and teased out, that takes years and years, that luxury didn't exist. So they just needed to ship whatever landed on the table. But Lorona Mare rejoins the Concord discussions in 221 January. Belags falls in 221 March. So again, the Valley should be very motivated to have the defeat of the Onyx aristocracy and the Ilsevere. And then the final 221 April, the Concord is signed. So all of the nations agree to cede their sovereignty to a new nation called the Concord. And gone will be their ways of dealing with things and their laws and their structures and their processes and their bureaucracy, and we would all agree to follow the Concordian constitution. was this a good idea or was it not a good idea? That certainly remains to be seen.
Mm-hmm.
And
And
then the
your
final
answer may well change depending on which realm you're from as well.
yeah, or the event that you experience or your
Mm.
character arc. You may want the Concord to end as quickly as possible. You want your enemies defeated, and then you want to go back to your nation. Maybe you want to go back to the way you want to deal with things, and you don't like sharing your sovereignty with a realm that you disagree with the way they do their elections. Maybe you believe the Concord is now indefinite, and we are bound together as a nation forever in perpetuity. Perhaps you don't like the Concord, and your character is sabotaging it, either intentionally or unintentionally. There's a whole variety of ways people can interact with the game, but certainly this timeline provides a base as to what you as an individual would have been going through in the lead up to the signing of the Concord. And it's also important to note that just because the Concord was signed and the new nation was born doesn't mean that all of those issues ceased. They are very much still ongoing, and there are still very much problems to solve on a regular basis.
Very much so.
The final entry is that the first summit was delayed. A cute little take on the COVID-19 pandemic delayed the first summit with a resurgence of Blastostrite in Resinderholtz, Ilsevere fleets disappearing from the bay south of Lorona Mare, and Zerkatal groups are sighted in the northwest regions of the Green World. And then the first summit happened after that.
And the rest is
Now,
history.
well, speaking of which, I am interested in your opinions, both of you, of whether, so obviously that's the start of the game, and in universe, the Concordian summits. Do either of you believe that any events that have happened in that timeline of us playing the game would be notable enough to put on this timeline if this timeline were to be continued?
I do. I think there's a couple that are worth putting there. At least.
Yeah,
So
what do you think?
the retaking of Bolsterley and it being returned to the Iron Valley, I think is a pretty damn big deal.
Mm-hmm.
Baseline, just it being taken over by the Ardabazan. So I think baseline, the retaking of Bolsterley, returning it to the valley, I think first and foremost, pretty damn significant deal. The thing is with the recent times, it's tricky to figure out like what is a like this is a definite put this here, this is worth it, right? Because like we fought. Okay, sure. Hang on a minute. No, we killed the eel, didn't we?
The shark, and then the shark turned up
No, but
again.
we also fought the eel as well, didn't we? Like way back at the beginning.
Yes, but just in the conflux though, we didn't defeat
Understood.
defeat the eel.
Interesting.
For me, it would be the collapse of the Twin Blade Confederacy would go on there.
Yeah.
The visit of various heralds would certainly go on the timeline. The establishment of diplomatic embassies would probably go on the timeline as well. The battle in Wayland, that the most recent one that has just happened, would win or lose, it would certainly go on there.
The raising of the fortress in Wayland as well.
The invasion of the Tribelands by the Zerkatal, so the almost loss of the Tribelands would go on there. The Almai would go on there.
What about the Idrian Cabal?
The Idrian Cabal experiments would go on there. Yep, the sacking of Nazafeza, absolutely. The discovery of the Glaven Glade and the Van Ghoul would probably go on there. Look, yeah, lots, lots,
Mm.
lots and lots, and I
Oh,
suppose that's the point, right?
well,
Like
hang on. There
we
is
want to be
another.
doing things.
There is another big one: the forming of the Loredomerian Parliament.
Yep,
Like
and then
that's
the
Mm.
huge.
consequent
Yeah.
failing of the Lord would go on there. Yep, you're not
I
wrong.
mean, the depth of that remains to be seen, but yes.
Mm.
Yeah, the shard circles, explorations into the void or the null or whatever you guys are calling it now.
Mhm.
Um, but to the point, I suppose we should be doing things that are worthy to be on this timeline. That's that's my view of why it's so fun that
Mhm.
we should be doing things that directly influence the story
Mhm.
that is being told. I certainly hope that every one who shows up to an event knows that they can influence the grand story that is being told, and it doesn't take an enormous amount of effort. It certainly takes an enormous amount of tenacity and patience and um, what's the word I'm looking for? Uh,
Willpower.
willingness,
Yeah.
willpower. Perfect. Thank you so much. Willpower to do so. But you can do something that is grand enough to be worth an entire page of the wiki or one of these entries in the timeline. So,
Mhm.
um,
I
yeah,
mean, on
that's
that note,
Absolutely.
something else that is probably worthy of the timeline is the betrayal of House Avalon to the
yep,
Yep.
Concord and Bolivar.
100%,
Mhm.
100%.
Yeah.
Um,
It's crazy to think
Which
that's
was a
yeah.
that.
player-led
Yeah.
event. Yeah. Um, yeah. So yeah, it just goes into, could you do that by yourself? Maybe, maybe not. But they achieved it with a small group of players.
Yeah, it's a crazy thing to think that you can just walk into Passage and become a part of history. Like live in like that's the craziest
Mm.
thing is like Passage is like the cultural hub of Southern Esterra for the most part. At least in comparison to the rest of Southern Esterra, the fact that we have such a massive collection of different nations together and peoples of such differing backgrounds, beliefs, and points of view, but a lot of them being similar and thereby just making history in the moment. Like it's a crazy thing to think about when you compare it to your own like your own real world life. It's such a stark difference, and it's a wild thing to think about.
For sure. Uh, the final piece from me before we wrap up
Mhm.
is a huge shout out, of course, to the Concord ST team for putting this all together.
Mm.
And I'd also like to mention Casey, who I believe put the timeline together and designed it all up in World Anvil. So they did an amazing
I didn't
job. It
know
looks
that.
very, very cool.
Cool.
Um, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe they did that in the early days. Happy to be corrected there, but I'm pretty sure I recall that. Yeah, they took all the information from the ST team and filled out the timeline
Mm-hmm.
in World Anvil. So a very good piece of work for sure.
Mm.
But that is it
Yes.
for me.
Yeah, Brenton,
Yeah,
any
I'm pretty
closing
satisfied
thoughts?
there.
Excellent. Oh, that was a long one, all the more so that I am not just tired, but also somewhat hungover from the prior evening's escapades at the Game Hen. But nevertheless, I genuinely was looking forward to this. It didn't disappoint as far as I'm concerned. Um, mm,
Yeah, look, thanks for having us on, Luke.
of course.
This came from actually, a question from Miriam from a couple of weeks ago, which prompted Mathew to link this timeline and for a bit of discussion and obviously, as I mentioned before, Matthew's quite detailed post of, comparing recent timeline events to real life historical events, which got me thinking of, I've always been thinking about different ways of um, getting information out to the player base, which is not just, hey, here's a wiki article
Hmm.
which is 10 pages long. So that kind of inspired me wanting to get something audio and discussion, conversational happening with it. So yeah, Luke, thanks for having us on, and Owens, thank you for kind of inspiring the whole thing and for joining us as well.
Of course, credit is always where credit is due. And this was most certainly a good topic to bring forward, especially now coming into a new year. We've had so much happen in the past
Mhm.
few. Now having things in a very interesting spot where we have all these echoes of the past are beginning to make their presence known much more directly, much more viscerally, for want of a better term. So no, absolutely, it was a worthy endeavor and very much well inspired, most certainly. Oh, that being said, I have food to eat, and we are getting pretty much to the pinpoint. So I'm going to thank not only my guests, of course, but everyone here that has watched thus far. If you're still here, or if you've left later and are watching the VOD back, thank you very much for joining. Thank you to those that have followed. Thank you to everyone that's hung out in chat, thrown out a lot of comments. Thank you very much. Enjoy the VOD for those that have watched this back later. And nevertheless, make your decisions, drink plenty of water. Remember, we're in the midst of summer, it's very hot. Stay safe as best you can. And we'll see you soon, hopefully. Take care.
Thanks very much. See you, everyone.
Bye, everyone.